At the divorce hearing, my husband boasted, "Today's the best day of my life. I'm taking everything." His mistress smirked. My lawyer whispered, "Did you follow my plan? Good. The show begins." The divorce became his nightmare. He leaned close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same bottle I'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago, and whispered, "Today is the best day of my life." Kevin had always had a gift for timing. We were standing in the hallway of the Crestwood County Courthouse at 8:47 in the morning, and my husband of 9 years was smiling the way people smile when they already know the ending, loose and wide and privately delighted with themselves. His lawyer, a man named Drew Callahan who wore cufflinks to a Tuesday hearing and billed $650 an hour, stood just behind his left shoulder like an expensive shadow. And then there was Sophie. She was 26, which made her 11 years younger than me and 14 years younger than Kevin. She had that specific kind of beauty that reads as effortless and costs a fortune to maintain. Her blowout was perfect. Her heels were 4 inches. She stood beside Kevin like she'd been standing beside him for years, which I would eventually learn she more or less had. She was wearing the bracelet. I want you to hold on to that detail because it's important. It's a gold Van Cleef & Arpels Alhambra bracelet, the kind with the little 4-leaf clover motifs, delicate and obscenely expensive, $5 $200 to be precise. Kevin had purchased it on a Tuesday afternoon in October, a Tuesday afternoon when he'd texted me buried in meetings, might be late, don't wait up. And I know the price, and I know the exact day, and I know the name of the sales associate at the boutique on Meridian Avenue who gift wrapped it, because by the time I walked into that courthouse, I knew everything. But Kevin didn't know that I knew. That was the whole point. He leaned in close and he said, "I'm taking everything, Laura. The condo, the accounts, all of it. You should have taken my offer when I was being generous." He pulled back and looked at me the way you look at something you've already thrown away. Quiet women lose in court. Sophie smiled at the floor, already somewhere else in her head, already spending. I said nothing. And then, from behind a marble pillar to my left, Harold Whitman stepped out. He was 68 years old. He was wearing a suit that had been well made sometime in the late 1990s and had been cared for meticulously ever since. He smelled like pipe tobacco and old books. He had a slight limp from a left hip replacement he'd had the previous spring, and he wore his reading glasses on a chain around his neck because, as he told me during our third meeting, losing time looking for glasses is losing time, period. He had argued 41 cases before the state's family court division. He had a shelf of commendations he kept in a closet because he thought displaying them was gauche. He did not look like a shark. He looked like someone's grandfather. He looked at me over the glasses and asked one question. "Did you bring the files we discussed?" "Every single one," I said. He nodded once. Then he looked at Kevin, really looked at him, the way a doctor looks at a scan, and said quietly, without heat or performance, "Prepare yourself, Mr. Bennett. Today is going to be educational." Kevin laughed. Drew Callahan straightened his cufflinks, and we walked into the courtroom. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the Tuesday in October when I found the receipt. I'd been with Kevin for 12 years, married for 9. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner when I was 26, and he was 29. And he was charming in that particular way that accountants sometimes are. Precise and funny, good at reading rooms, good at making you feel like the most important variable in an equation. I'm an accountant too. That's relevant. That's actually the whole story in a way. We built something together, or I thought we did. We bought a 2-bedroom condo in Elmhurst Park in 2017, in large part because my grandmother had passed the previous year and left me $120,000. Her name was Rosalind. She'd spent the better part of her working life cleaning other people's houses, and she'd saved that money slowly over decades. In a savings account she called Laura's Future. She told me that once, sitting at her kitchen table with her hands folded around a coffee cup, looking out the window at a yard she'd been tending for 30 years. Kevin handled our finances. It was one of those arrangements that feel sensible when you're inside them. He was good with money, he said, and I worked long hours at the firm, and it made sense to consolidate our assets, pool our accounts, let one person manage the household portfolio while the other one focused on building her career. Except I was the one building my career, and he was apparently doing something else with the time. I found the receipt on a Thursday evening in October. He'd left his blazer draped over the dining chair. Kevin was fastidiously neat in most respects, but had a specific blind spot for dining chairs, and I picked it up to hang it, and the receipt fell out of the inside breast pocket. I looked at it. Van Cleef & Arpels. 1 Alhambra bracelet, yellow gold, $5,200. I stood in the dining room for a long time. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I didn't call my best friend and sob into the phone. I have analyzed why in the month since, and I think the answer is that some part of my brain, the part that balances ledgers for a living, the part that understands numbers don't lie and paper trails don't evaporate, went very, very still and said, wait, look first. Understand the full picture before you move. So I opened my laptop. I pulled the bank statements going back 3 years. I built a spreadsheet, then I built a second one. I cross-referenced every flagged transaction with his calendar and with our joint credit card records, and with the Uber account we shared because neither of us had ever bothered to separate it. The client dinners at Maison Noire and Café Sorrento, restaurants I'd never visited, restaurants I hadn't known he frequented, the Ritz-Carlton charges in our own city, at rates that suggested rooms rather than the lobby bar, the Uber rides at 2 hour and 2:30 and 3:15 in the morning to an address in the Whitaker district that turned out when I mapped it to be a condominium building, Sophie's condominium building, the weekend conferences, Chicago in April, Nashville in September. I pulled his expense reports. I had access. We had a shared drive, one of the last relics of a marriage that had believed in transparency, and I found the hotel bookings. Doubles, not singles. Room service for 2. And in Nashville, a charge at Tiffany & Co. But the worst thing, the thing that sat in the middle of my chest like a stone for weeks afterward, was what I found when I went looking for my grandmother's money. I hadn't checked that account in over a year. Kevin managed it. We'd agreed, when he suggested moving it to a joint investment account for better yield, that he'd oversee it and I'd focus on my own work. I trusted him. That's the sentence I kept writing in the top margin of my legal pad, over and over, during the long evenings I spent in the storage room we'd converted into a home office. I trusted him. Balance, $42.18. I had to read it 3 times. The number didn't make sense in the context of the spreadsheet. It was like finding a typo in a legal document. Your brain refuses to process it because it cannot mean what it appears to mean, but it did mean what it appeared to mean. $120,000. Transferred out in increments over 26 months, small enough, most of them, to avoid triggering automatic flags. Trace to Global Gaming Offshore, Bet Now, something called Sunset Poker International registered in Malta. Kevin had a gambling problem. And he had been funding it with my grandmother's life savings. And he had been funding his mistress with my salary. And he had been doing both of these things simultaneously for years, while texting me that he was buried in meetings. I sat on the storage room floor for about 20 minutes. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and went back to the spreadsheet. I found Harold Whitman through a referral from a colleague whose sister had gone through a contested divorce 3 years earlier involving hidden assets. My colleague described Whitman as terrifying in the best possible way, which is not the kind of description that usually appears on a law firm's website. When I walked into his office, a cluttered second-floor suite above a dry cleaner on Clement Street, with bookshelves that appeared to be losing a structural argument with gravity, he was reading something through his glasses on the chain, and he did not immediately look up. "Sit down," he said. "I'll be 1 moment." I sat. I placed my binder on the desk. It was 3 inches thick at that point, with color-coded tabs and a table of contents I'd formatted myself. He put down whatever he was reading and looked at the binder. Then he looked at me. "What did you do before you became a client?" he asked. "I'm a senior accountant at Mercer & Flynn. I've been there for 7 years. He opened the binder. He spent 22 minutes reading it. I know because I timed it. He asked 4 questions during those 22 minutes, all of them precise and technical, about chain of custody for the bank records, about whether the investment account transfer authorizations bore both signatures or just Kevin's, about the specific platform names I'd traced the gambling transfers to. His face showed nothing. His voice showed nothing. When he finished, he closed the binder and said, "You didn't come here for sympathy." "I came for my assets," I said, "and his accountability." He smiled then, small and quiet and, yes, a little terrifying. "Here's what we're going to do," he said. "Nothing, for now." I stared at him. His lawyer is Drew Callahan. Drew Callahan is good at what he does, which is performing confidence in front of a judge and pressuring opposing counsel into settlements before anyone looks too closely at the evidence. He's going to file first, and he's going to file loudly, and he's going to paint you as a non-contributing spouse who's attempting to complicate a clean dissolution. He'll make offers. They'll seem almost reasonable, and I say no. You say no, and you say very little else, and you let Kevin believe he has already won. Whitman removed his glasses and polished them with his tie. We let him walk into that courtroom completely confident. We let him lie on the record. And then we introduce him to perjury. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of my life. Drew Callahan filed a petition claiming Kevin as the primary financial contributor to our marriage, characterizing my income as supplementary, a word I found so offensive I had to put the document down and go for a walk before I could finish reading it. The petition sought the condo, our joint investment accounts, and Kevin's contribution to what was described as a mutually agreed upon early retirement plan. There was no mention of my grandmother's inheritance. There was no mention of $120,000 missing from an investment account. There was no mention of Sophie. Kevin's first settlement offer arrived on a Wednesday. He offered me $18,000, the Honda Civic, and what Callahan's letter called a reasonable period to find new housing arrangements. I called Whitman. "Say nothing," he said. "Make no counteroffer. Let them read your silence as defeat." I said nothing. The second offer came 2 weeks later, slightly more generous, $31,000 and the car and 60 days in the condo. Callahan's cover letter included a line about my emotional difficulty processing the transition, which I read 4 times and then put face down on my desk so I wouldn't have to look at it. I said nothing. During those 6 weeks, I kept building. Whitman had connected me with a forensic document analyst named Margaret Voss, 22 years in the field, certified by the National Association of Document Examiners, who examined the second mortgage Kevin had taken out on the condo 6 months prior, the one bearing my supposed signature. Margaret Voss examined that signature for 4 days and submitted a 12-page report concluding with the kind of professional certainty that sounds almost casual. The signature on document exhibits A through C does not match the known handwriting samples of Laura Bennett across 17 distinguishing characteristics. It is my opinion that this signature is a forgery, a second mortgage, on my grandmother's condo, my name, not my signature. Whitman also connected me with a CPA CPA named Dennis Rourke, 34 years in tax compliance, who reviewed the shell account structures Kevin had used to funnel money from his consulting side income. Dennis Rourke used the phrase, pattern consistent with tax evasion, in a way that made my hands go cold. He used it twice, actually, very calmly. The way you say things twice when you want them to land. And I kept living with Kevin through all of it. That was the part people don't understand when I describe it now. I slept in the same apartment, I made coffee in the same kitchen, I said good morning and good night and how was your day, and listened to him talk about Drew Callahan's strategy like a man narrating a chess game he's already certain he's won. He was so certain. He was almost kind about it in his way, the way people are kind when they believe they're being magnanimous in victory. Some mornings I would sit at the kitchen table and look at him across the counter, and I would think, you have no idea. You have absolutely no idea what's in that binder. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark and I thought about my grandmother's hands. I thought about the specific shape of them, the way they looked folded around a coffee cup at a kitchen table, 40 years of work visible in every knuckle. I thought about the word she'd used, Laura's future. I thought about 40 to 18 in an account that had held her entire life's savings. And I thought, tomorrow. Drew Callahan was magnificent in the opening. I'll give him that. He was smooth and confident, and he presented Kevin as a man of achievement, a provider, a businessman who had carried the weight of a partnership that had grown unbalanced over time. He spoke about Kevin's professional accomplishments. He implied, deftly and without ever saying it directly, that I had been emotionally unstable, difficult, resistant to reasonable compromise. Kevin sat beside him looking like a successful man tolerating an inconvenience. Sophie sat in the gallery in a cream-colored blouse, phone face down in her lap, bracelet catching the courtroom light. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Mercer Cole, 23 years on the family court bench, a woman who I had researched thoroughly enough to know that she had a particular, documented intolerance for financial manipulation in marital proceedings, which is a polite way of saying she had seen enough Kevin Bennett's to recognize one on sight. She listened to Callahan's opening with an expression that gave away nothing. Then Harold Whitman stood up. He straightened his jacket. He did not look at his notes. He let the room sit in silence for just a moment, not dramatically, just enough to reset the temperature. This case, he said, is about arithmetic. He opened the binder. He went through it the way an excellent teacher explains a proof, methodically, quietly, without flourish, letting the numbers do the work. Tab A, $124,000 transferred from Mrs. Bennett's inheritance account to offshore gambling platforms over 26 months, documented with transfer records, platform registrations, and transaction IDs. Not market losses, not a downturn, not a mismanagement of funds, gambling losses, deliberate, repeated, documented. Kevin's lawyer made an objection. Judge Mercer Cole overruled it without looking up from the documents Whitman had placed before her. Tab B, the condo down payment, sourced entirely from my personal inheritance. Bank transfer on record, dated, unambiguous, and then the second mortgage, executed 6 months prior, bearing my name, and Margaret Voss's 12-page report on why that name was not my signature. Kevin had gone very still. Callahan was writing something rapidly on his legal pad. Whitman placed the Van Cleef receipt on the judge's bench, read the date aloud, read the price aloud, then placed beside it a photograph. Sophie, at a rooftop event 3 weeks after the purchase date, wearing the bracelet. The image was clear enough to show the pattern of the Alhambra motifs. Whitman noted, quietly, without emphasis, that the purchase had been categorized in Kevin's business records as Client Appreciation Q4. Judge Mercer Cole looked at the photograph. She looked at Sophie in the gallery. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Sophie's hand moved to her wrist before she could stop it. She looked down at the bracelet like it had just become something else entirely. Too late. Finally, Whitman said, and his voice dropped half a register. In the course of tracing these transactions, Mrs. Bennett, a senior accountant with 7 years of professional experience, identified income routed through a series of shell consulting entities in a pattern consistent with the deliberate concealment of taxable revenue. He placed the final stack of documents on the bench. Dennis Rourke's analysis, the shell account structures, the income figures Kevin had reported versus the income figures the transfers implied. Mr. Bennett hasn't merely defrauded his wife, Whitman said. He's defrauded the government. The room was absolutely silent. Kevin was looking at me across the courtroom, and I watched it happen in real time. The collapse of the version of himself he'd walked in with. The version that had told me quiet women lose in court. The smirk, gone. The loose, confident posture, gone. The swagger that had been so certain of the ending. In their place, something raw and afraid and very, very small. Judge Mercer Cole set down the documents and looked at Kevin the way I imagined she'd looked at a long succession of men before him. Not with anger, not with contempt, with something that had moved beyond both of those things into a kind of tired, exacting clarity. Mr. Bennett, she said, you entered my courtroom as a victim. The records say otherwise. Callahan asked for a recess. The judge denied it. I've read that family court rulings take days, sometimes weeks. The Honorable Patricia Mercer Cole took 11 minutes. The condo was mine. The fraudulent lien created by the forged second mortgage was Kevin's legal and financial problem to resolve. The inheritance losses, $124,000 minus $42. 18 remaining, adjusted for recoverable amounts, were calculated at $82,000 in damages mortgages he was ordered to repay. The Audi he'd leased in his name, along with its outstanding $31,000 loan balance, went with him. His attorney's fees were his alone. Court costs, his. Kevin Bennett walked out of that marriage with debt, a tax investigation, a car he couldn't service, and the distinct, immediate, very public attention of the IRS. He had entered the courtroom as a man who believed he was taking everything. He left it with almost nothing that wasn't a liability. In the hallway, I watched it happen between him and Sophie. I wasn't close enough to hear the words, but I didn't need to be. She'd understood, the way smart, practical people always understand the numbers before the emotion catches up, that the financial picture she'd been promised bore no resemblance to the financial picture that existed. I saw her face do the calculation. I saw her look at Kevin the way you look at a bad investment you've already made. You said there was money, I heard, because she said it loudly. You said you handled it. And then she turned on her very expensive heels and walked away down the courthouse corridor without looking back. She kept her hand at her side, away from the bracelet, and I noticed she didn't take it off, which tells you something about Sophie. Kevin's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something moved through his face. He looked up at me. They've already started, I said, because Whitman had told me to expect the HR call within 48 hours of the tax referral, and the records had gone to the relevant parties the previous Friday, faster than expected. But Kevin had always been efficient at creating problems. He stood in the courthouse hallway with his phone in his hand and looked at me the way someone looks at a landscape after the weather has completely changed. Laura, what did you do? I smoothed my jacket. I picked up my bag. I thought about a kitchen table in a small house, a woman with careful hands, and a savings account she'd named after me. The accounting, Kevin, I said. Nothing more, nothing less. 6 months later, I am writing this from the condo, my condo, the one my grandmother's money helped build. I've repainted the living room. I bought a secondhand desk I've been meaning to buy for years. I've started cooking again, actually cooking, not the performance of cooking that happens in a marriage where one person has gradually made the kitchen feel like contested territory. I made Rosalind's stuffed cabbage recipe last Sunday for the first time in 4 years, and I stood over the stove and I thought about her hands again, and I cried a little, but the good kind, the kind that clears something. Kevin's case is ongoing. The IRS does not move quickly, but it moves. Callahan dropped him as a client 2 weeks after the hearing, citing irreconcilable conflicts of representation, which is attorney speak for I am not going down with this ship. A new lawyer has taken the case, someone whose office, according to a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it without knowing I'd find it interesting, is in a strip mall in Garfield Heights, which is not where Kevin imagined his legal story ending. Sophie is, by all accounts, fine. Sophie landed, as people like Sophie tend to land. I don't think about Sophie. I think about Whitman sometimes, how he walked out from behind that pillar, 68 years old with his pipe tobacco smell and his glasses on a chain, and said 6 words that were so simple and so completely devastating: prepare yourself. Today is educational. I think about the spreadsheets, the binder, the 4 months I spent in that storage room with the door closed, building something out of every number Kevin thought I'd never look at. Here's the thing about quiet women that Kevin never understood, that I don't think men like Kevin ever understand, until the moment they are standing in a courthouse hallway with a buzzing phone and an empty wallet and a woman in expensive heels walking away without looking back. We watch, we wait, we document. We are not quiet because we have nothing to say. We are quiet because we are listening. We are quiet because we are building something you cannot see and will not find until we decide it's time. We are quiet the way a room is quiet before every light in it comes on at once. Kevin wanted to take everything. I let him think he could. That was always going to be the most expensive mistake he'd ever make.